for MarkMonitor, and which is really all about brand protection, protecting assets, right? Take it away, Seth.
Thanks, Chris. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here. Nice to be with you. When Chris asked me, what song do you want to have played when you walk up here this morning, I said, well, I don't know. I DJ as a hobby, so like songs run through my head all the time. But after giving it some thought, I thought of, why not Dr. Dre from The Chronic back in 1990? And the reason I chose that is, it reminds me of the days when I was single living in the DC area, going to clubs and bars and that sort of thing that 20-somethings do. And, you know, I never imagined at that time when Dr. Dre sang, hey, 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 smoke weed every day. It can be a reality now in the District of Columbia. You can do that legally. So those of you who come from a place where marijuana is not legal, you can enjoy it here in the District of Columbia while you're here for recreational use. I am from Seattle. Weed is also legal there for recreation purposes, but I don't do that. This morning's content was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Julia's speech or talk about getting your establishing a really good online presence was very important. How you portray yourself to your community, to your audiences, to your potential donors, that's critically important. And then Brian's talk on the content and the importance of video, I also took quite a bit from that. But now, as Chris prepped us, we're going to talk about the importance of protecting that. You have built these great communities. You have a great mission, charitable purposes, and unfortunately, there will be people out there that will exploit that, exploit your goodwill, take advantage of your goodwill, trade off of your name and your trademarks, or your copyrights, or your likenesses of people that are important to your community. For those of you who are not familiar with my company, MarkMonitor, we are a domain name registrar. We manage portfolios of domain names for companies and organizations, including nonprofits from all over the world. And we're also a brand protection company. We do detection and mitigation and enforcement on intellectual property, whether it be trademarks, copyrights, counterfeit goods, fraud, malware. We have an anti-piracy and an anti-fraud team. So that's the work that we do. And my pleasure to work with some of the biggest global brands in the world, including those in the nonprofit world. So we're not going to talk about today about how MarkMonitor does brand protection. What we're going to talk about is how you all protect your brand. And so that is why I have invited some of MarkMonitor's great clients, brands, to join me on stage to tell you firsthand about how they manage the reputation, the online presence, and the intellectual property of their nonprofit organization. So Chris has already introduced them, but I'll just do it again. This is Allison Leader from the American Red Cross, and this is Chuck Roslov from the Wikimedia Foundation. That's the company that is responsible for Wikipedia. By the way, do you have a Wikipedia page? Okay. Oh, I wanted to ask you that. And Leslie Nettleford with AARP. So that's going to be our panel today. And the first thing I thought we would talk about, first of all, questions are welcome, but we're going to save some time at the end so you can ask us some questions. But we've done a little talking amongst ourselves, and I think we've got some really good content we want to share with you during the 40 minutes that we have together. So we're going to start first with constraints on resources, because even though these organizations on stage, you may say, well, they're really large nonprofit organizations. They have tons of resources, but you'd be surprised that in every nonprofit organization, the reality is, the money that you raise, which is usually through donations, or some other kinds of fundraising, are really going to go to your mission. And to have to carve that out to do things like pursue people who are, infringing on your mark, it's a tough decision to make. So we're going to start with how these subject matter experts address that problem. Okay, so I'm going to take a seat and let them do the talking now. So let's throw it first, I guess, to Chuck. Let's talk about, at Wikimedia Foundation, the kinds of things that you leverage in order to, help protect your intellectual property and your online presence.
Sure. So one of the advantages that we have at the Wikimedia Foundation is we're working with a global community of volunteers. These are the folks who actually write Wikipedia and contribute to Wikipedia and some other free knowledge projects that we host. So one of the advantages of that is they're all over the world, and they are really the folks who are responsible for the value of the brand. And we are in this position of stewardship of the brand on behalf of the broader Wikimedia movement and community. And so, but the ability to work with our community members is an important and very useful part of our brand protection efforts, because they're all over the world and they are sort of our eyes and ears out there, and we get a number of sort of trademark enforcement matters that we get come from our community members. They notice them, they send them into us, and they're also kind of brand ambassadors themselves. There's this sense of, because of the value that they have brought to the brand, and why Wikipedia is so meaningful and well known is because of their work, there's this sense of shared brand ownership. And so not only can they refer things to us for trademark enforcement work, but they can serve as those brand representatives out there in the world and work to reinforce the things that we want to reinforce with the brand.
That's great. So you don't have to do this job by yourself. You can enlist, those who are part of your community to help you do that. I think that's a great takeaway. Allison, is there anything you'd like to add?
I would definitely amplify that. We have a lot of volunteers, and our volunteers are our best brand ambassadors. And they not only talk a lot about what we do, but they also help us protect the American Red Cross emblem and our brand, and make sure that they are reporting to us situations where they see things that confuse them. There may be someone who is providing services that has a vehicle marked with a Red Cross, and they think that that could cause a problem, so they'll report it to us. We also try to use them to help us if we have identified a misuser, to be able to take photos or gather information about that, so we don't have to necessarily always hire an investigator. We can reach out to our community and get some help from them to try and figure out what a situation is. So we are always thinking about maintaining costs, trying to do brand enforcement in a way that is respectful to the community, respectful to our community of brand ambassadors, and is also very, very cost efficient.
Leslie?
Sure. So it doesn't hurt that AARP has about 38 million members who, thankfully, not all at the same time. They don't contact us all at the same time, but they do let us know if someone is offering, for example, an AARP discount. And they say, is this, real? I had a really strange experience. And, we reach out to those entities and we say, please offer a senior discount, not an AARP discount. Please respect our brand. So that is one way that we're able to keep an eye on things. And also, because we do have relationships with a number of different companies that we vetted, a lot of times they'll let us know if a competitor is trying to use the brand. And so, these industries, they tell on each other, and they let us know. We're able to, keep a closer watch.
Great, great. So I bet the audience would be curious to know sort of how you run your teams within each of the organization. We know that nonprofits come in all shapes and sizes. small to global. And I think it might be useful if you all could each maybe tell how you work with the different departments in your organization, or where brand protection sits. I mean, you all are lawyers, but I know that in some places, in some nonprofits, there's not a legal department. It may have to sit in your marketing guys or your PR folks, but maybe you could take that one, Leslie. And
Sure. So one of the things I started a few years back was a brand protection strategy team. And it's a cross-departmental team, and we collaborate with IT, marketing, digital, and basically we band together and we talk about what's most important, what's most strategic for us to go after. Because when I started doing brand protection, it was just me. And I was like, this is a lot of work for one attorney to handle. Now we have a wonderful team that includes a paralegal and a program associate, and they're magnificent. But it's also very helpful to have the buy-in of other people in other departments who are also constantly vigilant and letting you know, this is a priority for us in this area. This is something that's a pain point for us. And that helps us to be able to be strategic and go after the things that are most important, and we're not just playing whack-a-mole all day long.
Right. Chuck or Allison, would either of you like to comment?
Sure. So I'm very lucky that I have a paralegal who works full-time on trademark enforcement. And I probably spend a quarter of my time dealing with enforcement and other issues related to protecting intellectual property. We have close relationships with our marketing department and the other departments that are active users of the brand. And I agree that whether it's a formalized structure or not, being able to work with the folks who are on the front line, who know how the brand should be used, and working with them to understand how it's being used, how it's being misused, what their concerns are, what their biggest pain points are. We also work closely, I'd say, with in the space of domain protection, we work specifically with our information security department. Information security manages the ownership of all of the, centralizes the management of all of the domain names that we hold. And so they are a big participant in the issue of domain enforcement and what decisions we make. So we work very closely with them. They didn't always necessarily understand some of the legal issues related to domain and trademark issues. So our partnership has been really great for both sides of the house, because we can help them understand what's enforceable, what's not enforceable, and when there are larger issues at play, and they can really help us understand what they see to be a driver for misuse or something that's problematic for the space that they are managing.
Chuck?
I think the only thing I really want to add to that, I want to second what you say about the security team being very crucial and marketing. I think one area in particular, so we also have our trademark enforcement, brand protection housed within the legal department. But it's very useful to have a good relationship with your social media team, because we see there's a lot of infringement out there on social media and confusing uses, and both to help to work with them to ensure that they know what appropriate uses of your marks are from sort of a trademark perspective, but also so that if they see infringement, or they might have sort of methods of dealing with those, you can use like Twitter DMs or something instead of sending a kind of more formal complaint from a lawyer. And sometimes those kind of informal enforcement practices can be just as effective and be kind of nicer and maybe even less time intensive.
Great. The next topic I thought would be of interest is, because I think many of you have seen this happen, is the fraudulent fundraising or the fake fundraising sites that are often built from typo-squatted names or misspellings of your trademark in a domain name that tries to divert your donors to their site. We also see a lot of, at MarkMonitor, a lot of phishing activity around, big events where it spotlights nonprofits. You won't be surprised to learn that when there's a natural disaster in the world, that our work for the American Red Cross typically spikes at that time, because there are people who are trying to take advantage of the Red Cross and the work that they do in times of crisis. So I should probably throw it over to Allison to talk about, in those times when there's a spike in fundraising fraud, how do you manage those domain names, and what are some of the strategies you employ to take those down, and with or without MarkMonitor's assistance?
Sure. So I do want to say that MarkMonitor has been a great partner, because it is really hard to be one person or two people trying to watch out for what is going on, across the internet. So having a vendor that we have been able to work with to kind of train, and to work with your AI to train it to help us identify fraudulent fundraising. So exactly, keyed to, and I think any nonprofit, if you have times where your appeal is going to be at the greatest and your ability to fundraise is at the greatest, is probably when you are going to be dealing with situations of fraudulent fundraising. So we are very attentive exactly during disasters, post-disaster. If anyone is registering a domain name that relates to the disaster, and obviously if it uses the word Red Cross, it's going to really raise our notice. For example, right after the hurricane that hit the Bahamas, there were a spike in Bahamas Red Cross registrations, and we were very lucky to be able to work with the Bahamas Red Cross to help them identify. It was a smaller organization. They're a part of the Red Cross movement with us. We were able to identify this is where fraudulent fundraising may take place, and what we do is we work with MarkMonitor to send certain set letters, and we see if the website is active and has active content. If the content is ours, we will either send a letter related to our trademark, or we will send a letter related to copyright. We have standard letters for DMCA notices. We also will look to see if there's actual fraudulent fundraising that is already taking place. And we do find that, unfortunately, and we have found that the ISPs, or the hosts, are very helpful, and they will, if you could send them a notice, and we will just look on their general websites for their email address that is where you're supposed to report things, and we will let them know, and things do get taken down. We also have reached out to some of the platforms that people use for online fundraising to let them know that their platform is being misused, probably in violation of their terms and conditions. And we have found them, again, to be very amenable to very quickly shut these down.
Terrific. Chuck, anything you want to share about the domain management at Wikimedia?
Yeah, when I think about donation issues, especially, one thing that comes up for us fairly often are mirror websites. So it's a website that has taken the content of Wikipedia and usually the sort of look of Wikipedia and put it on a different domain name. Now, from a copyright perspective, that's perfectly acceptable and legitimate, because all of the content on Wikipedia is freely licensed under a Creative Commons license, and people can take it and modify it and distribute it and copy it and share it however they like. But from a sort of brand management perspective and kind of a security perspective, we do sometimes, when we see these mirror sites reported to us, we look at, okay, what is the domain name? Is that confusing? We don't want someone to think this mirror site is wikipedia.org. So is it something too similar to Wikipedia? How are they using our logos and trademarks? Do they have a sort of like disclaimer about those? Are they using a different logo? But then also the donation link. Is it there? Have they taken it out? If someone clicks it, does it actually go to our donation page? or does it go somewhere else? So these are some of the things we look at, and when we decide to take action and contact the hosts of those mirror sites, those are usually the things that we're looking at and asking them to change.
Great, great. Leslie?
I think one of the things that we look out a lot for are the sites that are claiming that AARP is an insurance company and they're selling AARP insurance. So to make it totally clear, AARP is not an
I'm in the
insurance
insurance
company.
business.
We don't sell insurance. We do work with providers of insurance, right, that we've connected with, and they're offering a special product, and then, you know, because of that, we're able to place our brand behind it, but we're not an insurance company. So what's really frightening to me is that they'll have these sites up, and then they'll be asking you for your personal information, and you know, you think you're getting, oh, I'm getting AARP insurance, so let me go ahead and give them my information. It's a trusted brand, so we try to really shut those types of things down.
Great.
Yeah, and I would also like to mention, it's something that
Yes.
we had talked about before. We have found that folks will send emails out to the public, and then they'll put a link in the email, and exactly those are the links that go back to a page that is typo squatted that almost looks like exactly your domain. And so those are the reasons why we focus on sites that may be inactive but are typo squatting. It is really important to keep track of that, because that is a very common way that fraudulent fundraising takes place.
Thanks for mentioning that, right. Here's an interesting question that probably, or an interesting issue that some of you have probably encountered, and that's infringement made by people in your community that really don't intend to do harm. From personal experience, I do some pro bono legal work for some nonprofit organizations, and one of the things that happens with the nonprofit I work for is that people in their community, people who support the work that the nonprofit is doing, will host their own fundraisers, right? And create events to raise money for, with the intention of sharing that money with the nonprofit. So the intention is good, but not so good if you're trying to manage your brand. So maybe I'll have Chuck talk about some of those issues, and how are you going to deal, have the panel talk about, you know, how are you going to deal with somebody whose intentions are good, but they just infringed your, your marks.
Sure. This is certainly something we encounter quite a bit. It's sort of another component of having that global community and that shared ownership of the brand. Is just because there's shared ownership, still everyone needs to make sure that they're sort of using the brand responsibly. And so we definitely have times when we have to get in touch with our community members and say, hey, don't, you know, modify the logo in this way when you're using it, or you know, this event isn't actually associated with such and such, and so please don't use this logo. And I think it's often just a very, I see it as, yes, it is, there is a goal of changing some behavior so that it aligns with our brand and proper trademark use, but really it's an opportunity to sort of further build those relationships and to reinforce some of the values and principles underlying the brand. And so that's a good part of both for those sorts of internal communications where we might be talking with our community members, and for our external brand protection, like sort of cease and desist letters, they tend to be very informative and very explanatory about this is why we want you to make this change. And I'll say that a lot of those we handle them in-house. We do work with MarkMonitor for some of our brand protection, but a lot of those ones where we want to have that kind of personal touch, we'll handle them in-house. We have a team of wonderful sort of legal interns and fellows who work on those with us. And we have had some phenomenal success both with people complying with our demands, and we get a lot of, especially for those external requests, people responding to us saying, oh, I had no idea, I wasn't thinking about it, I love you guys, I just donated. Like, we get that quite a bit, actually.
I'm sorry.
So taking a sort of friendly approach and using it as an opportunity for almost marketing in addition to brand protection
Yeah.
is important.
Well, you mentioned cease and desist letters, so I think that could be a little tricky. I remember, Allison, you mentioned to me that you have to be careful with that. You want to share some of your
Sure.
wisdom on how you discipline folks in your community.
Sure, and so I will say that I used to work for a media organization, and there was a situation where a cease and desist letter was sent out on a copyright issue that really was probably fair use, and they just got publicly spanked. So you always have to remember, and this was years and years ago, but you always have to remember that anything that you write to the public, any letter that you sent can appear, in any number of different forums because we're a very connected world. That does not mean that we should not enforce our rights and that we should not explain to people what they've done and to make demands that are appropriate. But we just always want to, in our cease and desist letters, to take a tone that, is respectful of the people that are on the other side. Always, I agree with Chuck that always having something that really explains what your organization is, why you are enforcing your rights and why that is important, is well taken in a cease and desist letter, and then explaining to them really what they have done that has caused the problem. And then working with them, being then ready and willing to work with them in an amicable fashion to resolve the matter if it is something that can be resolved amicably. That doesn't mean not enforcing your rights. It doesn't mean not being assertive in your rights. It just means always being respectful as well.
Perfect. Leslie, you have anything to add?
I agree with what you've said already. I think that the education piece is very important.
Right.
And just keep in mind that, the person who's doing it, in our case, sometimes it's a member, and they just feel so much affinity with the brand that they feel as though they're able to communicate in this way. So, we try to make sure that there are available forums for you to communicate as an AARP member without necessarily getting that social handle that uses our brand or something else like that.
Right, right. So the next topic I want to bring up for the panel, and this may sound self-promotion. It's not meant to be, but I do want to talk about how you will, to what extent you all use outside vendors and of all kinds, or what you do in-house versus what you do, sort of outsourced to either lawyers or other companies, and how do you manage that? So maybe Leslie, you can take that one.
Sure. So of course, as you know, we use MarkMonitor, and they scan the global web, right, to make sure that everyone's behaving properly out there. But in addition to that, we do handle some things on our own. So for example, even though you guys do handle social media, that's something that we've just chosen to take a more hands-on approach to. And we manage that ourselves internally. We have a paralegal that assists in checking out the different sites and then using that those platforms, trademark complaint forms, in order to handle those matters. So, some things we do internally and some things externally. We have to keep in mind what our budget is. Even though we're a pretty big nonprofit, we're still a nonprofit, so we want to be as lean as possible. Right. And I think it's important to still have that personal touch. And for us, that works very well in the social media realm.
Great. Allison, what kind of tools do you use internally or outside that help you do your work?
So we absolutely use MarkMonitor for managing domain issues, and I think that if you are at a nonprofit that is able to do that, it is very helpful, just because it is sort of large and overwhelming without certain tools. That being said, a lot of the work that we do on investigation, if we get a report of infringement, we work internally with different free internet resources to be able to investigate. And I will say that something that has been really useful to us is Google Maps. So the Street View maps, if we hear that someone has signage that is using our logo, we are able to literally go and identify and then see what it looks like, even though they may be across the country. And then we can also, we do simple things like, let's say we are working with someone to negotiate a phase out. We've identified a misuse and we're working with them to get them to stop using. We want to really document the fact that they have stopped using something. We often ask them just to, if they were supposed to get new signage or they were supposed to remove something from a vehicle, we ask them to snap a photo with their cell phone and send it to us. And so we don't need always to use the most robust resources in order to do investigation. We also use the USPTO's test database of trademark registrations to investigate, to make sure that we're not infringing someone else's trademark to do searches.
When you spoke about Google Maps, I had this vision popped into my head of Allison sitting behind a desk with, controlling a drone as it goes over the landscape looking for red crosses everywhere. That's interesting. Chuck, anything you'd like to add?
I've spoken a bit already about sort of how we do handle some internally and outsource some. Mm-hmm. I can expand a bit on how we make that decision. And I think that part of it is like our internal resources they're very valuable and scarce. And so ensuring that whatever we handle internally is where we can have the most impact, where that kind of hands-on approach will make the most difference. And so I think that sort of focusing on that is how we decide what to handle internally versus what to outsource.
Great, great. So one other topic that I'd like to raise, and then those topics we didn't cover that you're curious about, we'll have time to open the floor to all of you to ask our subject matter experts here. But one of the last topics that I'd like to bring up is trademark protection. I mean, you could trademark, how many trademarks should you file, and where should you file them if you're, in the case of you all who have far-reaching global impacts. So for those in the room who, do a lot of work internationally, it might be helpful to give them some guidance on that. So Chuck, you want to?
Sure, yeah. Well, Wikipedia, of course, is a website, and the goal is for it to be available everywhere in the world, and our mission is to reach everyone in the world. So we're thinking globally, and that can be a bit daunting when you're talking about trademark registrations, both from a budgetary perspective and just from a sheer number perspective. Yeah. And so we look at, okay, where do we have an existing community that's active? And let's make sure that we're protected there so that our communities are protected, so that their work isn't being undermined by someone trying to use the brand sort of more nefariously. We also think about, okay, where do we want to build communities? Let's think proactively about where are we going to focus our activities and make sure that kind of we have that protection before we start going in and trying to raise brand awareness or increase sort of use and readership of Wikipedia in a particular country or region. Right. So those are some of the concerns. We also think about Wikipedia is organized around languages, not around countries. So we also look at what are some of the bigger language versions of Wikipedia. Where are those languages spoken? Do we have enough protection there?
Great, great. Allison,
So it's simple for me in certain respects in that we're the American Red Cross and we operate specifically in the United States. So that has been our driver of where we file trademark applications, where we register. But I would say that one thing that's important wherever you are registering, it's the background work that you want to do to make sure that you have a mark that is protectable and is registerable, so that you are developing a standardized style guide for your mark, that you're making sure that everyone across your organization is using it in that standardized fashion, that you are following rules for how you refer to your mark so that you're not so you're not using it in a non-trademark fashion. You also want to make sure that for folks who are allowed to use your mark, whether they're affiliated organizations or fundraisers or third parties, that you have agreements with them. And it can be a simple agreement, but it is really important that you protect your trademarks. You take that protection seriously, because a little work on the front end will really make the situation much better if you get into a complex situation with a misuser on the back end.
That's a really great point, to have, very specific and written down policies for the use of your trademark, so that everybody is really clear about how they use the brand, both internally and for your community members. If you have that in writing, and can make it available or post it or something, or refer folks to it, that's extremely helpful.
We're all nonprofits, but we can all be sophisticated trademark owners.
Yes. Leslie, anything else you'd like to add to that?
So I think one of the important things to think about is how many trademarks you're going to have, right? So at AARP, we do concentrate on our main brand, but we have so many wonderful departments that come up with some really exciting, innovative things, and they want to protect that name. And so first, of course, we clear it to make sure that there's not going to be any interference with something that's already wonderful out there. But then we really ask the question, how long are you going to be using this? Is this a pilot program? Do we want to go ahead and test first and learn from it before we go through that process? Because the trademark process is not short, and it's not cheap. So that's something that we try to do to really evaluate it, because once it does become a trademark, then it's within my area to enforce and make sure that we protect it. So we just want to be careful about what actually goes in that bucket.
Great, great. All right, now it's your time to shine, folks. And as we do that, we did put together for you one slide only, of some important reasons for you to actively protect your brand and online presence. So, the one is, if you're going to be able to maintain your rights in most jurisdictions, the burden is on you to police those, police your IP. That is your obligation as an intellectual property rights owner. So you have to do something. Doing nothing is not an option if you want to protect your brand. It's very important, as you've heard the panel today talk about, preserving the credibility and trust of any fundraising. If you don't, actively police, again, fraudulent websites and things of that nature, it's going to erode your community's trust in the work that you're doing, which is the third point there. And, you want to prevent other parties from capitalizing on the goodwill that you all built over the last however long that you all have been doing your eleemosynary purpose. So, that is critical. And you also want to raise awareness and visibility of your organization by making sure that your marks are used in the correct way. So those are the things that we came up with as some key takeaways, but we have a few minutes for questions for these subject matter experts. So please feel free to grab a mic and let's see what we've got. Yes, sir.
How do you handle when someone uses your handles?
Oh, yeah, Mike.
Hi. How do you handle when people use your social media handles when they do their posts? Like if I wanted to, let's say something about aging, and I attach your handles so that it gets more views.
You mean like a hashtag or something
Yeah.
like that? Oh, we welcome that. I mean, that's wonderful. We want to, increase the conversation. Where there's an issue is if you represent yourself as AARP, if you call yourself AARP #1 member or something like that, and there's any confusion about whether you're speaking on your behalf or on behalf of the association.
There's a marketing question about whether, is your account going to retweet that or something, if that's a message you actually want to boost.
Any other questions? Chris.
She got a question. And I'm experiencing it now with trying to build speak